Thank you all so much for being here. This is a regular meeting of the Isla Vista Community Services District Board of Directors. I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6 p.m. I'd like to announce that this meeting is being recorded. Jonathan, can you call the roll?
My voice is also gone, so listen up, listen closely. Director Brent?
Here.
Director Grace? Here. Director Bertrand?
Here.
Director Freeman? Here. Director Hedges? Director Newen? Here. Dr. Hedges is in Chicago.
Okay, 6 present. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the Chumash people who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Chumash elders, past, present, and future, who call this place Anascoyo, the land that Isla Vista sits upon, their home. We are proud to continue their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We thank the Chumash community for their stewardship and support, and we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding. With that, we can go to the consent agenda. Does anyone have anything they'd like to pull?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion to approve made by Bertrand, seconded by Thurlow. Is there any public comment? Any more board discussion? We will have a period for any public comment. No worries. Any more board discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 6-0 with 1 absent. Now we'll move to item 3, public comment period. At this time, any member of the public may speak on matters within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board that are not on the agenda. The board will not take action on any item not on the agenda except as provided for by law. Any requests to speak?
Okay, well, since I already made that clear, this is my first time at this meeting, obviously. I'm Devin, and I just wanted to talk with you all. I work for Coastal Dispensary, and as I think you all are quite aware, the county is going through their retail cannabis ordinance process. Isla Vista will have 1 retail cannabis company, and I'd love to just talk with you all about what you hope to see as a cannabis company, what you hope to get kind of as a community in terms of community benefits and what you really want to see a cannabis company do. I'm here really to just kind of hear from you, so another time I'd love to set up meetings with all of you and just kind of learn about what your role is in the community and how me as an applicant can kind of support some of the causes that you guys have been working towards, because I do have the opportunity to talk with supervisors extensively about Isla Vista, and I just want to make sure that the conversations we have are actually reflective of what you guys want to see. So, this is my first time, but I'll be coming more often. And I went to IVCSD, so I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Devin. We appreciate that. We'll get your contact info after this.
Great, thank you.
Are there any other requests to speak on matters not on the agenda? Okay. With that, we will move to item 4, discussion and action items. So the first is contract with Lucidity LLC for a spring community festival, and it sort of goes hand in hand with 4.2 contract with Santa Barbara Sheriff's Office for supplemental security services. There are still some outstanding issues in the contract, and so Jonathan and I are not recommending approval at this time. We are setting a date later on in early December to try and get that contract passed. We've had productive discussions with Lucidity about trying to iron out some of these issues, and Ross has been looking at the contract. It's priority number 1 for us right now, so I wanted to use this opportunity just to talk a little bit about issues related to the Spring Community Festival and give an update on some of the things that we have been working on. So for context, our board is on the path to approve a community festival during Deltopia weekend of this year. The goal is to try and make the event more safer by providing those who wish to go to a safe alternative that includes a concert in the park, a beer garden, games, and other fun things, and an open mic stage. We think that this is a more productive model at trying to alleviate a lot of the public safety problems that happen during Deltopia, everything from arrests to assaults, both violent assaults and sexual assaults. And our goal is to draw as many people away from some of the public safety problem areas as possible and into the parks for the concert and give people something fun to do. So We have been meeting with stakeholders, and we had a meeting with Associated Students leadership earlier today to sort of fill them in on our progress. We met with them back in August when this was still a vision and getting underway. And I think that the meeting went pretty well. We got some good feedback on some of the outstanding questions that this board has had in terms of questions about rebranding, in terms of questions about how to best publicize this in the community without creating the kind of buzz that would draw out-of-towners into the community. And I'd say that it was really productive. We had another meeting at the Isla Vista Safe Task Force today where we were the number one item on the agenda and presented about our vision and got a variety of good feedback ranging, I'd say, from extremely positive to willing to go along and entertain the idea. We had some pushback from the Sheriff's Office leadership, but I think it was really helpful to know that we still have a strong support from our local law enforcement in Isla Vista, and that was reiterated at the meeting. I think that we're going to have to do a little more work with the Sheriff's Office to try and alleviate some of their concerns, but also to try and give them a better idea of where this event is at, what we're trying to accomplish, and how we're going to do it. I think that some of those issues will be able to be resolved once we have a contract and a plan that is a fully fleshed out security plan. So I'd say overall it was a good chance for us to be able to sort of express our vision. One takeaway I had from the conversation was that there is a lot of angst, I think, among people in government, whether it's county law enforcement, whether it's the university, the district attorney, all these stakeholders, but there is no vision for how we solve these problems. The status quo of just trying to crack down more doesn't work. It just drives a wedge between law enforcement and students. And we reiterated that and stuck strong to our position in that meeting. And I think that people are starting to recognize that the vision that we have is actually something that is a viable alternative, and I think overall people are coming around to it. We'll just have to have some more conversations, and George is looking at me like I'm being very charitable in describing the meeting.
Really? Did you go to the same meeting?
But I'd allow you to jump in and sort of give your 2 cents on how some of the conversations went, if you'd like.
I totally appreciate your optimism and your positive. I came away feeling like there continues to be major resistance from the hierarchy of the Sheriff's Department. They don't believe this is the right path to take, but they have no alternatives. And so I think I want to commend you and Jonathan, because I thought you guys maintained a very level-headed and professional and political, well, I went right into the gutter and essentially said, if you're going to kill this, you need to come up with an alternative. You, the people around this table, law enforcement, drug and alcohol, fire, all of you need to come up with an alternative, because the Sheriff's Department is saying that this, the number of participants in this is growing, and they too are concerned about where it's going. But I didn't hear a good alternative. I do think we need to continue the dialogue. I think you and Jonathan are perfect people to continue that dialogue, and but I also think we're running out of time. And I wanted to digress and talk about the contract, but I don't want to do that ahead of your schedule. But I came away feeling that there's great resistance, not great resistance, but there's resistance from the hierarchy of the Sheriff's Department about the CSD taking this on. And we didn't even get into the point where they want us to pay for law enforcement.
And I think that it's a good question, but I will just remind the board that we had major resistance from Sheriff's Office leadership when we went through the process of contracting UCPD with UCPD for a sexual assault investigator in that position, and we remember how that was able to turn out. So, not necessarily saying the situations are analogous, but again, I think that we do have momentum with other stakeholders as well, and we're going to have to drag them along to this, because the truth is that cracking down and enforcing and arresting and ticketing our way to public safety is not possible. That does not work. That just drives a wedge between law enforcement and our community, and we can't go down that road again. We saw what happened in 2014 when that happened, and there was a riot. We can't go back to that, and it's something where I think that they're going to have to come along and realize that, because this is the way that the community is moving. So,
Can I digress?
yes, you can, because I don't think I have anything else to say about other stakeholder engagement, other than I will note that Jonathan's been having some really positive conversations with local businesses, just in regards to their role in the event, being vendors. And one of the big elements of the event that we've been thinking about is allowing local businesses, whether it's like Buddha Bowls or I know Tacos and Taproom has been talked to have sort of like their own food vendor carts around the loop area and around the park. And so seems like there's strong buy-in for that, and we've, I think, talked on the board numerous times, and Director Freeman has brought up on many occasions that the business community feels like they've been left behind with the decline of large events like Halloween, and this potentially is a way for them to increase their sales and also give people something that they want, tacos and bread bowls and everything in between. So I'm excited to hear the progress on that. So we can turn and talk a little bit about the contract. I want to go to George first.
No, go ahead.
I'm going to go.
Oh, I'm hoping we might have some public comment on this first item before we go to the next one.
Oh, I think,
We're
George,
still on
did you
the
want to
first
talk
one.
about the
I want to
first
talk
one?
about the first one.
The first contract.
Okay.
The first
Got it,
contract.
thank you.
So my concern is that given the tenuous nature of pulling together all of these players, I want to ask our council, can we make sure that we have an escape clause in this contract? I realize that there'll probably be some kind of penalty for it, but I think we need to be able to jump out of the airplane at the last minute.
It's one of the items that I'm in the process of framing for Lucidity, because right now they have in their draft contract a liquidated damages clause that really is a damned if you do or damned if you don't situation in the district, and it's one of the major reasons why I push back on it as hard as I did. So we're in the process of trying to address the concern that they have that they're going to start the process of staging everything and they're going to incur costs, but have a reasonable point if for some reason the district needs to have an avenue of departure so that you're not spending 10% of the budget on something and not having any materials.
Great, good. And that reminds me, the sheriff's position at today's meeting was you should wait until next year to do this. And let's spend the next year talking about how we're going to pull this off. So I think it's really fair to say their position is wait until next year to put this on. It's too soon, and there's plenty of time for us all to get on the same page. So the second piece is about this agreement. Jonathan, I followed you into a business tonight, and they're thrilled about the idea. They had a copy of the Lucidity proposal on the counter, which is why I started the conversation. I really think we need to flood the community with that proposal, if you think that's a good strategy. everybody. So it was clear that today, if we'd had that proposal and passed it around to all those people, we could have answered at least some of the questions. So if it's possible, I think we should, our next communication strategy should be get that proposal out everywhere in Isla Vista as well as among our stakeholders, and send me 20 copies. I don't want at district expense. Thanks. And thanks for your good work in getting out there.
Thank you for that, George. And I just want to say one thing before I go over to Ethan, which is that I'm sort of interested and willing to entertain what the sheriff's office solution is, but with one big hesitancy, which is that when we went through the last major negotiation that we had with their leadership, I do not feel that they were negotiating with us in good faith. And so it seems to me that it's sort of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. And we have this other supplemental law enforcement contract in front of us today, which we're also recommending we wait on and pass that jointly with the contract with Lucidity. But I do have major questions about how much the, I guess you could say the opposition to this is coming from a place of good faith. And I would just say, you know, I think that there's still people in leadership that think that they can arrest and cite their way out of this event ever happening again, which is just flat out not true.
So Spencer, let me butt in ahead of Ethan. Let me tell you that the hierarchy in the county does not know anything about, well, let me not go so far as to say, I don't think there's wide knowledge within the county that this contract is being negotiated. And so that was, I mean, somebody who was there from the county was very surprised when I said, don't you know about the contract that for us to pay for extra deputies? And they knew nothing about that. So part of the issue too is that within their hierarchy, I'm not sure the communication is that good. Not to be critical.
I'm not sure I understand this issue. You're saying we're gonna pay for supplemental law enforcement services for
Yes, that's what 4.2 is.
over and above what the sheriff spends on the event anyways?
That's what 4.2 is.
Over and above, they're gonna provide their regular service to that weekend and then we're gonna pay over and above? Or is this gonna be a supplement, we're gonna go in and start paying and they're gonna stop paying?
No, so
That's 4.2.
yeah, that's
I know.
4.2. But I will just say, because I think we're sort of taking the items jointly, that with any large event, there has to be contracted deputies in order to provide security for the event, no matter which security company you're using. The goal of the Guardian team's mission is to alleviate the need for law enforcement presence as much as possible. It is still the sheriff's office that ends up dictating that. And we've had very positive conversations with our local foot patrol about what that number could look like. That still needs to get up, you know, to the people who ultimately make the decision in the bureaucracy, though, and it could change.
Yeah, we'll talk about that when it gets to 4.2.
Okay. I'm going to go over to Ethan, patiently waiting.
Thank you.
Sorry, Ethan.
Oh, no worries at all. So one thing that I'm thinking about is those of us who live in Isla Vista and our friends who spend a lot of time in Isla Vista, we know how urgent this is. I can totally understand the concerns of people who aren't having these discussions every day and people who don't live through Deltopia to see how it's currently handled. But those of us who are here, we know that this is urgent. So that's why I think whenever we're speaking with any of our fellow stakeholders, we just really need to keep our foot on the gas pedal and have this moving forward. I can certainly support scaling back a little bit in certain areas, but I mean, we've been here for many years and we're not making progress with this event, and I think this is a great opportunity for us to do that this year, and Spencer, I thank you for really pushing this.
Jay?
So I guess I would say that we are making progress on this event, but I would also think that, because a month ago we had a meeting and we were talking about these, contracts and how we're going to handle it, and it was essentially if we don't get the contract done right now, we won't have enough time. Now it's a month later, and we still don't have the contract done. It's not going to happen until weeks from now. We are butting up against, going well past the where we can actually make this happen, I think. And so I think a lot of what we're getting is like getting like shocks about. So we're moving very quickly. We're getting all this together, but I think we need to do this next year. I think that we've got not to stop and pick this back up a year from now, but to start where we are right now and spend the time to finalize all these contracts correctly. I mean, 4.2, I mean, I'm really excited about doing 4.2. But to actually stop, do all these contracts correctly, make certain that all the different players are involved and all of the different people actually know everything that we're doing, make certain that we've got the right kind of buy-in. I just don't think we're able to pull this off right now. We are still in the process of, I think just like from what I've been hearing, really serious issues with the contract with Lucidity, much less this contract that's coming out of 4.2. I don't know. I can't be supportive of this year at this point. We are going extremely quickly and trying to wedge this all in, and I think that it's going to end up like when you talk about urgency, for example. The big concern that I have is that this might actually end up being the massive failure mode of the district. That we essentially what we end up doing is locking ourselves into in this case like a 3-year agreement, locking ourselves in the contract, putting out something like 15% of our budget on an event where we have relatively little actual stakeholder buy-in, and then end up. That's what the district gets known for is all of that work, as opposed to all the great things we've been trying to put together over the course of the last 2 years, all the things we have put together, all the things that we have on our plan going forward for the next 2 years. I'm currently very concerned. But.
So I just want to respond to one thing you mentioned, which is that I don't think that the contract issues in terms of getting those worked out with Lucidity are major issues. We had some differences in the way that the contract was approached. They sort of have their standard agreement, we have our standard agreement, and they're being reconciled.
Are we allowed to speak to specific issues? Actually, that's like a procedural question here, because I know that wasn't actually, the agreement wasn't sent out. We all got to see a copy of it, I believe, but it wasn't clear to me if the reason why it was not being presented to the public today was because we weren't allowed to actually go through any of that.
We just think it's still in the process of being negotiated, and so we're going to let the issues play out. We're not going to air them sort of and talk about them until if we come to a standstill. But I confidently that won't happen. And the second thing is that again, I think it's abundantly clear that this is an urgent issue and that there is no alternative that's being proposed by anyone else on how to address this. It may feel strange to you that we are, well, no, I won't put it that way. I'll just say we're leading on this issue, and it is different. We haven't been out in front of an issue of this magnitude before, and I think that this is what it looks like, where we are going to have to make sure that we bring everyone else along with us. I don't think we have relatively little stakeholder buy-in. I think that we have made positive gains with the local businesses, with the university, with our county supervisor and her staff. I think that we have positive engagement from the community and a clear voice from the community that the police state atmosphere that we see during Deltopia is not beneficial. I think that there's a clear voice from the community that things that the university are doing, like sending out the advertisements to other campuses telling them to stay away, are not beneficial.
I still need to poke here because now this is essentially an argument structure trying to make me look like I'm on the other side of that. I mean, I've been since 2004 pointing out all the same things you're pointing out. I just believe that if we're going to be doing this, we should be doing this next year.
I'm making an argument for the fact that there is urgency, not trying to say that you disagree with any of those things, but that this is an urgent issue. And while I think I'm open to hearing about if there's a need for us to tweak things, Lucidity has told us that they can still pull this off. We talked about it just earlier today. So, I think that we have to keep the momentum going because we have put, number one, so much time into this, and we have, I think, achieved a lot already, and I believe in our vision. So I'm gonna keep my foot on the gas pedal.
Over here.
Bob?
I just, kind of agree with Jay on a lot of his points that, and a little bit different, that I think the county's gonna jam this down our throat and not let us do what we wanna do. No different than they jam trash down our throat, lighting, all the things we've tried to cooperate with on the county just don't seem to get done. The community center's sitting there idle, the community rooms sitting there idle. They promise us week after week they'll get it done. We don't have agreements. I'm very frustrated with the county, and I think it gets back to the basic flaw of county government in Isla Vista is that they're not here. I'm not saying the sheriff's not here because they're out here doing their job, but the way that the sheriff approaches their job is they're gonna do what they did on Halloween, and they're basically gonna shut that party down and, have 15 deputies standing on a corner and 2 people walking down the street. And that's their solution to stopping these events. And I wasn't here on Halloween. I only talked to one person, and they're the one that told me the story about the 15 people, officers, without anything to do, standing on the corner. And somebody says, hey, nobody went on Del Plata, we just went to the next street over. Or, who knows? But I'm frustrated with the county, and I applaud Spencer. I think Lou City is doing a great job. I think we got a great plan. I'm just scared we don't have the powers that are stopping us to agree. And it's hard to get the university to agree, and it's definitely hard to get the county to agree. And they've been using other means to stop this event, and I don't think they want to reverse that. But, and I don't want to say this has been around since they burned the bank. The way that you enforce, law enforcement in Isla Vista. I don't want to say it's old school because they're changing too, but it's just the culture of what, I don't know how we make that change, and I think we're trying to make that change. I'm kind of with Jay. I don't know if we make it. And I don't know if we put a lot of money into this and then we fail. And I get back and go, God, we got to get back to the little things, and let's do what our mission is. And I don't think our mission when we formed the district was to do festivals. We get distracted by some of that, doing the right thing, but I don't know if we're ready for it. I don't know if we're ready for this.
Mr. President, I'm sorry to jump in. I don't normally like to jump in the middle of the discussion. I do want to draw everyone's attention back to the fact that 4.1 states that the board is considering and possibly approving a contract, and the board's not actually considering a contract. So I think it's important for the conversation on 4.1 to basically close, and if the remaining board members can reserve their comments, and any board members who have already spoken can reserve any further comments that they have for when the board is considering an item that's on the table. I think it might be a little bit more appropriate than having just a generalized discussion on a contract that isn't actually under consideration because it hasn't been presented to the board.
So I'll move that we table this discussion until we're presented with a contract by the council.
Okay, I don't think we need a motion for that, but I will say that I appreciate everyone's input, and we're gonna take it into consideration as we move forward with this. Is there any public comment on this item? Okay, I'm gonna go over to Justin, and then I saw Janet. I'm like looking around for the hand, and then up front.
So I'm Justin Schroeder. I'm the Community Resource Deputy with the Sheriff's Department out here. We here locally really are trying to work on programs, and we've supported this idea. I want to let George know and the rest of the board know that unfortunately with the county, it's a long process. The restorative justice program, which was my little baby when I got this position, took over a year. You guys supported that program, which I appreciate. We just had the first class this weekend. That was like a really small program and it took me over a year. So with those managers you're working with, it just takes a lot of time. And I had to be in their office every week knocking on their door. They didn't like the program and now they love it. So it's just it's tough to get them to change, but we'll get there. So we're here in Isla Vista with you guys. We're supportive of it. And we're going to try and push it through. I was just on the phone with people because I don't get invited to those bigwig meetings, but we're trying to figure out who made those decisions and who we need to talk to make it right. So we're trying to help you guys out.
Well, thank you, Justin. I appreciate the continued support and everything that you're doing here locally to try and be a responsive and good face for local law enforcement. I'm going to go over to Janet.
I'm Janet. I'm a resident here. I've been here for a number of years. And I'm not going to comment on the contract because I don't know anything about it, but will you take a comment on the idea?
Yes, we can just do general public comment.
And I just want to preface by saying my comments, I'm passionate about this because of last year's Deltopia. I was the first responder to a very tragic accident, and while that was happening, my dear friend was trying to help, and this woman was from Los Angeles who was injured, and at the same time, my friend was trying to help a girl who was being assaulted, and she was doing a meetup. They were both from out of town. On social media, they decided to meet up in Deltopia. And these are the kind of things that I don't want to see happening in our community, and you don't want to. And it doesn't have anything to do with the students that were here. These were all from out of town. So as far as the goal, so this is where I'm coming from. So as far as the goals go, which is to change the atmosphere of Deltopia, it has to be a multi-year project. It's not going to happen in 1 year. You have to think out a little bit farther because it will be a gradual process. If you want to stop Deltopia, if that's the goal, that's a gradual process. So you can't think of it just in terms of 1 year. Say you have the festival this year. It's a success. Word spreads. March and April come around the following year. People say, oh yeah, I heard Deltopia was great, let's go. But now there's no event. And now it's worse because there's no event for everybody to come to. And rather than fewer people coming in, more people are coming in. So I think if you're going to do something that, if your goal is to still have this event, but change it, you have to look out many years. You have to have a plan for year 1, 2, 3, and 4 until the atmosphere actually changes. Otherwise, it might backfire.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Just from like a student perspective, this seems like an amazing and like perfectly smart idea. I hope it does happen this year. I don't know anything about what you guys are actually working with, obviously, so I don't know the struggles that you guys are facing, but it seems like to me the danger of Deltopia is like you have so many people just on one street, everyone's drunk, there's more cops there than usual, like it's just too much of like a heightened experience in this like one street. So if you do have things that will attract students away from that area where they can have fun, they can be, in a public eye, not doing terrible things or whatever, like that is like the safest solution that you can have. I'm sure it sounds like some big party festival thing to people outside of the student community, but I'm sure the people who really want to like party and go hard will do that, and the people who want to have like a good experience will participate in this. Like, I think this would be the best like solution to make Deltopia safer, honestly.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
I've been here for the last couple of meetings, and I do have to say that I've been able to get the full discussion, how the city got to be involved, and how they were approached, and how the budget was going to be set up. And I am a person who would attend the festival. I would be a paying customer, but as a resident and taxpayer, I do not think it's wise to, it feels like there's a lot of excitement building, and it was contagious. I was here last week, and it makes sense for this festival to happen, but at the pace that it's going, it feels like Lucidity is just, it's pushing on, and they're saying it's now or bust, and we have to do this because we have to do this, and we're going along, and I think it would be best to rationally think this out, and I was thinking what Jay mentioned, it's 15% of the budget, and is this the rainy day budget funds that this is coming out of? I'm not sure, this was mentioned before, but this is 15% of the yearly budget, not I wouldn't describe it as urgent, but it's still a one-day entertainment event that this would be used for. I don't think it's an appropriate use of funds, and given this is a young, newly formed entity, that it might have a PR nightmare on its hands and lose credibility with the state, and I think it would be unfortunate for that to happen. I think it would be a good idea to think this through, because the whole, it's going to be exciting because it's Lucidity, but at the same time we're going to downplay the fact that it's Lucidity, how this isn't exactly closed door meetings, and so how is that going to happen and be planned out in such a short period of time? It just doesn't seem wise. I know it seems like a downer to put the brakes on it, but it seems like the best, wisest choice would be to postpone it until next year when there's a long-term plan. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, I'm gonna bring it back to the board then. Ethan?
Yeah, just in my closing comments on this item, I'll never forget my experience walking around with George last Deltopia when we were right next to one of the wild parties on DP Oceanside and someone fell off the balcony onto the beach. I won't forget being in front of a house on 6-7 DP where multiple people were coming out of that house after overdosing on drugs. I won't forget all the people who get hurt in that event, how it works right now. So like while I am a fan of the entertainment aspect of this and I look forward to having a great time at this event, my motivation for this really is to make us all safer.
Thank you, Ethan. Christy?
I'd just like to agree about what Janet said about it being a multi-year plan. I personally think that this event won't be 100% successful the first time around, because that's just impossible that everyone is going to show up and love this event, because they're going to think about Deltopia and they're not sure how good it's going to be yet. But I feel that throughout the years, when people see what it truly is, that it's a preventative measure, it's about public safety, not just entertainment, because I know a lot of people are afraid that it's about just fun, but in reality it's about preventing the stuff that's been happening on DP, which is so bad. But as of right now, I'm totally on board with passing this I'm totally for this contract. I think it's really important to have this event over Deltopia.
Christy? Okay. I don't know if there's any more board discussion, but thank you everyone for your input. We will have the hearing set for December 3rd when we will consider the final contract. And hopefully Jonathan and I can work to bring sort of a menu of options for the scope of work. Okay, so we have item 4.2 is next, but I want to jump actually to board reports. I spoke with Ethan before the meeting, and he has an important item that he just wants to report on.
Thank you very much. And I just bring this forward now because I think that it's something that's important for our community to be aware of. It's something that's important for us to acknowledge happened, and it's something that's important for us to, going forward, really take seriously. Over the weekend on Twitter, a number of us up here on the board were made aware of a horrible homophobic hate crime that took place in Isla Vista. A member of our LGBTQ community here in Isla Vista was, by their own account, called homophobic slurs, which led to a concussion, 7 stitches, a fractured nose, and obviously the trauma that comes along with that. It's absolutely maddening that members of this board and members of the community hear about this through Twitter and not from our public safety agencies who respond to this. And I say that it's maddening because we've dealt with this before. Outside of these doors in Estero Park in April of 2017, there was a gay man assaulted while playing basketball, and he had his jaw broken. We've had other incidents in this community. Outside of hate crimes, we've had serious incidents. In June of 2018, there was a shooting right up the block from here. A teenager was driving his father's truck, and he was shot at. And that's something that was never released until we found out about it through back channels and pushed for it to be released. When I was speaking to the intergovernmental relations class, many of the students are here today, someone wisely asked, when I asked what are their priorities for Isla Vista, they asked, how can we know when something bad is going on? And I'm just frustrated because we have this conversation over and over and over again, and we don't make any progress on this. It's really unfortunate that members of our community don't have the right to know what's going on in their neighborhood when there's something serious that happens. Additionally, I want to say that I spoke with the Pacific Pride Foundation today, our local LGBT resource center, as well as the Resource Center for Sexual and Gender Diversity at UCSB, and neither of these service centers were contacted. The Pacific Pride Foundation has established relationships with our public safety agencies to be there and to advocate for people in the aftermath of hate crimes and hate incidents. I would know myself. And I just really want to say that it's unacceptable and offensive as a member of this Isla Vista LGBT community to have this go on and for it not to be worthy of public attention and not to be worthy of a serious community response. I know my colleagues have been very supportive of this area of making sure that our community is in the know when something goes wrong, and we need to be more supportive of that than ever. So thank you, Mr. President, for letting me make that comment now.
Thank you, Ethan, and thank you for bringing attention to this issue. As you mentioned, it continues to be a problem, and it's something that we're going to continue to fight for. Thank you. Okay. I want to move back to discussion and action items and go to 4.2, contract with SBSO for supplemental security services. As I mentioned, Jonathan and I are not recommending this for approval at this time. I think it should be passed along with the contract for contract with Lucidity for the Spring Community Festival. Basically, the contract will allow us to have a relationship with the sheriff's office where when we do need supplemental security services for any sort of event, large festival events like the one that we've been speaking about included, that we will have sort of a mechanism to be able to go about that. So
I'll move to table this one.
Okay. Is there any other discussion on the contract?
I would very much like us to not table this item because I would like, because it sounds like it's going to end up coming back in a non-modified form, and I've got serious comments that I would like to make about the. I'll just say, I think this contract is ridiculous.
Okay. Well, in that case, feel free to go ahead. I mean, if it's better for you to.
Well, is there anyone?
I don't know.
Now
Anyone
there's a
object?
motion. Unless you retract the motion.
I'll
Now
withdraw
we're-
the motion. I'll
Okay.
withdraw the motion.
Go ahead, Director.
So, to re-provide some context here, right? I mean, as to make certain that it is understood, by you again, by anyone here is trying to understand this, I have cared deeply about the police state involved in this, in these events that occur in Isla Vista for a very long time. I mean, I was a student here from 1999 to 2003. I was incredibly bothered by the reaction and the process that the sheriff's department has used with relation to, for example, Halloween, Utopia. I wrote an article in 2004 for the Daily Nexus, which is I oftentimes say like, it's like I'm down in writing on the fact that I care deeply about this particular problem, going back a long time. It was called, Halloween could be fun if Isla Vista were a democracy, and it was going over the police state issues. I was, for a long time, the only, and I will certainly say the loudest supporter of doing events like this and of trying to change this process, of going to the Board of Supervisors and essentially just trying to tear into them over the advertisements that they were putting into place and everything that you describe as the reasons for doing all these things. I also, with this district, I was part of the process since essentially the very beginning, when Josh was first talking to Cameron about it, when the meetings where Jonathan got involved, the food co-op, the process of going through all the AB3 and trying to understand what it was that we were trying to do, and particularly the fears of what setting up this district in particular ways might end up leading to with the political dynamics of all the other powers that be. And so now I show up, and this contract is nearly a culmination of that type of fear. So like the comment that Bob had started to make during 4.1 about the idea that this is a contract above and beyond the services. I mean, the county already spends millions of dollars on these events every year. The county puts an incredible amount of money into emergency services. And one of the biggest issues that we had was the idea that we're going to construct this district, and then what's going to happen is that the county is going to figure out how they can shove all of their liabilities onto us, to figure out how, now that we have a taxing authority here in Isla Vista, how they can make it so that we have to start paying for all the things that the county is starting to do. And this contract to me is just an example of this occurring here. So we are in the scope of this contract, we are able to ask the county, we are able to ask the county sheriff's department in order to provide security for an event. Now, first of all, I find it really strange that the term of our contract for our being able to do this, to take on these actions, starts in 2019, ends in 2022, and we actually do not have an ability to terminate it. The county is allowed to terminate it essentially anytime they want, and we have the ability to terminate it if there is an issue for cause for which we do not have the ability, for which remedy does not occur. So that's where if you see in like section 13, we've got for convenience, the county may terminate the agreement. For cause, the customer may terminate the agreement. And the customer, in that case, should county fail to provide customer all or any part of the services, the customer may, at the customer's option, terminate this agreement if such failure is not remedied by the county within 30 days. So that's annoying. Now, the payment methodology for this contract is that we are going to be provided estimates of the cost. Now, these estimates that were provided of the cost are very explicitly stated to not be a maximum allowable charge. And if you then look into what we will be charged for, if the event is canceled by the customer, written notice to the customer, I'm sorry, I did a really weird thing with the way that I underlined this. Skip that, sorry. If deemed necessary to carry out the duties assigned to the sheriff's office, personnel and/or equipment may be added by written notification to the designated representative of the other party. Additionally, in the unlikely event that sheriff's deputies are requested to respond to the event for emergency assistance, the customer will be charged for such resources at the most current sheriff's volunteer response rate. If additional charges are accrued during the SVR event, the area lieutenant and the customer will confer prior to any billing taking place, but we are on the hook for the costs based upon my understanding of the other clauses. I mean, we have the ability to talk to them about it, but meanwhile, we are required, the customer shall agree to defend, indemnify, and save harmless the county and to procure and maintain insurance in accordance with the provisions of Exhibit C attached hereto and incorporated herein by reference. We are holding the sheriff's department, not just indemnified, but holding harmless for safety issues this contract to me is ridiculous, and to the extent to which I have seen over the course of the last 5 years of watching the county negotiate with the sheriff's department is essentially just an endless pit of liability that we're going to end up attaching our district to. This is the kind of contract that, I mean, I constantly see the county trying to do something with the sheriff's department, and the sheriff's department manages to just rake them. The sheriff's department manages to just, oh, well, of course we're going to need that, we needed that, well, the safety issues of the community designated that we absolutely needed to have this equipment, and we needed to bring in these people and all sorts of stuff. Even the costs, that's essentially what they're doing already with these large events. So it's specifically something we've seen them do it to us in our particular community with the cost of the county. But it's just, I don't even understand how we are contemplating this contract. Much less how this is something that's just like, oh yeah, this has kind of gotten thrown in here with the idea that we're discussing the other contract, and now 2 weeks from now, this contract's going to come back, and we're going to be trying to vote in order to put this into place. This contract is, I would say, just totally wrong, entirely in the opposite direction, and I mean, it's possible that it's not even something that our district is allowed to do, because I think that it actually starts moving in the direction of supplanting services that are being provided for us and that have been provided for us classically by the county and are one of the current largest costs here in Isla Vista. So, I mean, I just, unless this contract is essentially just scrapped and rewritten entirely from scratch to be entirely opposite of what this contract currently is, I certainly will be voting no on this. And I would hope that everyone else here would. But.
So, just to clarify, so this contract is, and the concept of having, when you throw a large event that requires county permits, the procedure is that in order to get the permits, you have to have a law enforcement on-site security presence, and those levels are set by the sheriff's office. In this case, Lucidity in the past has worked to set those levels with Lieutenant Eddie Schweit. And so this contract enables us to do that in the event that we pass the contract with Lucidity and begin to do this event. Under no circumstances would this lead to law enforcement shifting regular law enforcement costs that were not supplemental to us. And if there's a way, I mean, we have to request them to come and provide us with law enforcement services for that to even happen. So, I don't know, maybe there's a little bit of disconnect here, but I don't see what the concern on that is. There's no way for us to pay money and get, you know, there's no way for law enforcement to just go and put a bunch of cops on the street and say, oh, you have the bill now, if we don't request for that to happen. And I think that the entire ethos of this board, and one thing that we are very united in, is saying that we do not want to supplant services that are currently being provided, and we do not want to increase the police state presence any more than it already is. So I too am frustrated by the fact that the county sheriff's office spends over $130,000 each year during Deltopia weekend, and still would like us to have these on-site security staff. But again, to the best of my understanding, this is regular procedure for entering in or getting the permits to do a large event. When we've spoken with Foot Patrol leadership, they've come back to us with numbers that are around less than the fingers you have on two hands in terms of personnel that would need to staff this event. When Lucidity puts on its festival, they have 4 personnel that are there at any given time for the duration of the festival, which lasts about a weekend, and ours is for a period of 4 or 5 hours. Is there any other comment on this from the board?
Well, I'm worried like Jay is. This is a standard county contract, and it's pretty open-ended, and it's pretty, under the payment methodology. To me, it's just not very accountable. That it gives the sheriff an opportunity to blame the event for bringing in mutual aid or whatever they need to do, and we're gonna pay for it. And I don't think that your intention of the contract, our intention of the contract to just put a few more security staff at this event that we pay for, in my opinion, once you get that estimate, there's just another roadblock to not do this festival. That's how I look at this. Unless they're gonna give us a nice, and say, well, I think we can cooperate with you, and here's how much it would cost us to do that, then we have something to talk about to execute this contract. But all these other concerns that Jay brings up, that this is it's not a two-way street, it's a one-way street in terms of us taking on all this liability. So I don't know. I read the payment section and said that's not a good way to do business. I'm arguing with the landlord today. He says, here's how much it's gonna cost us to clean your apartment. And I go, okay, that's an estimate. Now go clean it, show me it worked, and then send me an invoice. And he says, no, I just need to give you the estimate. And I go, no. And this is big. They're gonna give you an estimate, and then they're gonna charge you what it cost, even if it's above the estimate. It's an open checkbook. And so I don't like the payment section.
Question for staff: have we conferred with Lucidity on how this contract lines up with the contract that they have with law enforcement?
You know, we haven't, and this was also supposed to include things like board meeting security when that was, so event here, this was an event too. So I think this is a contract we have with the government, not with Lucidity. I can check.
Okay, I think we should speak with Lucidity though, just because it may be more beneficial if they already have a contract in place with law enforcement for law enforcement services, so that we don't have to take on an additional one and go through the process of trying to negotiate this out, because it seems like it would be, as Bob mentions, just another roadblock, and we have some resistance here. Okay, I'm going to open this up for public comment, and I see a hand up, so I'm going to go over to you.
Oh, hi. This is just a clarification. Is there a copy of the contract being discussed available to the public at this meeting?
Do you have
There were
extra ones?
copies, you know, we have more people than we make copies, so if you want.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment on this item?
I'll just address Bob's real quick if I could. Bob, you mentioned this is a one-way street. It actually has been a two-way street. I've met with Spencer and Jonathan multiple times, and we've whittled down the personnel to the bare minimum we can do. So it's very reasonable. The contract is just like a boilerplate county contract. But our management staff wants to request like 20 officers for an event like this. If this was a sporting event or something like that, we'd have 18 to 20 people working. We've whittled it down to like 6 to try and make it as reasonable as possible. So
Yeah.
we really are trying to work.
So if we want to do a one-off for this event and get the estimate and know what we're contracting for, that would be probably okay with me if it was a one-off. Just so we see what the model looks like and the one-off works, then we're comfortable getting into a longer-term arrangement with the sheriff. That would be my thing. So I would rather just say, hey, if this is a one-off and I know the estimate and, hey, it's reasonable of what we're going to incur for that event, then and if you have whittled it down, I have to take your word for that. We're reading into this something that's you know, bigger than that.
Right, and I think that's just a standard boilerplate what they shoot out to everybody.
I
So-
know I've read 500 of these in
So I
my.
just wanted to clarify that we really are working and we're trying to do it. Getting beat up over here in the corner tonight, I gotta stand up a little bit. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Justin. You're right.
I'm not sure if I'm the only one that's super lost because I can't read the contract, but can I have a clarification on what this like pit of liabilities is, or like why there's such like a big disconnect, whether like or why like part of the board is for and why part isn't? Like I'm just a little lost.
Ross, do you think you could describe the liability section in a way that is easy to understand?
Sure, and also the contract's available on the IVCSD website. If you just click under the current agenda, it's one of the attachments, or if you need to refer to it later. But specifically in Exhibit C, the indemnification language is provided there, and that should be read in conjunction with Section 8, which is on page 2. So Section 8 on page 2 is indemnification and insurance, and there's a reference there to Exhibit C. So essentially, the way that the contract is designed is that the district requests law enforcement support for an event, whether it be Spring Festival, whether it be a board meeting, whether it be some other type of a meeting that it has not been discussed tonight. There's a request for law enforcement support. Sheriff's Office does a calculation on, on the payment side, which is a different section. But if their law enforcement officers are acting in the course and scope of their duties and carrying out their responsibilities under the contract, then what this contract says is that there will be certain responsibility for the district, and then there's certain responsibility for the sheriff's department or the county. So typically in these types of situations, that's what happens. They're acting in accordance with the responsibilities and carrying out the terms of the contract between the two parties. In theory, that's how this works. There's a provision here that says the customer's indemnification. Indemnification means we take responsibility for it. The customer's indemnification obligation applies to county's active as well as passive negligence, but does not apply to county's sole negligence and willful misconduct. That means if county officers act in a way that is outside the course and scope of their duties, or they act in a way that is contrary to law, that's willful misconduct. They do something on purpose. Negligence is when you don't act the way a reasonable person would act. So if the county is found to be solely negligent or willfully misconduct, then this indemnification provision does not apply. That, if those two things are not found, then the indemnification section would apply. Just something to point out, that in a law enforcement situation, I leave this to law enforcement officials in the back to disagree with me if they feel it appropriate to do so. We don't command officers on how they carry out their duties. They are, for lack of a better phrase, independent contractors. We don't control their training. We don't control them when they go and get their post-learning domains. We do not have any type of scene control. We do not direct them in how they carry out their duties. So the opportunities to arise for this district to engage in any type of misconduct which would trigger this indemnity provisions are almost zero. In almost every case where the officers are carrying out their responsibilities under this contract, they will be acting in accordance with their obligations under the Penal Code, 832, 832.5, the other provisions with respect to their training and their peace officer powers under the Penal Code, as well as to their practices and standards and training under the Sheriff's Office. If they're acting within the course and scope of carrying out those duties, then they're acting in accordance with being peace officers, irrespective of whether they happen to be doing so within the context of this contract. Just because they happen to be at the Spring Festival doesn't suddenly transform them into Isla Vista Community Services District police officers for which this district will have responsibility. That's probably something that is maybe not within most people's understanding, because you're not lawyers, but that's how, in practicality, in practical terms, that's how this is going to operate. It would be different if IVCSD had its own police department and it was asking for supplemental police services, where those supplemental police services were underneath the command and control structure of the district. But in this case, they're going to operate the way that their supervisors tell them to operate. And they're going to operate consistent with their practices and policies and training. And they're going to operate consistent with their requirements and powers and obligations under the Penal Code. Ergo, the types of opportunities for them to run afoul of this indemnification language, or to put it another way, the opportunities for them to do something that's going to make this district liable are almost zero. But that's just my opinion.
Just to help the students out, though.
Sorry.
When you have two governments working, we both carry insurance. We both carry liability insurance. The judgments that you can get if something bad happens can be huge. And they can take all your insurance. You have to pay a lot more into the future. You know, especially in the law enforcement area, boy, they run into it all the time. You know, I mean, there's so many things in their line of business that can go wrong, and they can be accused of wrongdoing, and there's a lot of liability that goes with that. So when we're looking at these contracts, we're this little old district out here, and we're going to go throw this party. If something goes wrong, there's a lot of liability that we face, or could face, and that could be bad for our district. So it's really about things you could read in the paper. When things go bad, they can cost governments a lot of money.
Thank you for that, Professor Geis. Yeah, we do have our entire reserve item just for if someone sues us. So, or not if someone sues us, but for if we have to pay out money because we did something wrong. I'll go over to Jay, and then I think unless there's any other comments, I'll close this one out.
I have a clarification I would like to make, and I have a question for council. So first of all, clarification I would like to make is that when I'm also talking about pit of liability, I'm not just talking about the indemnification clause. I'm talking about the idea that the county can essentially shift whatever costs they want towards us. And so to demonstrate a scenario that would go through my head, which kind of plays off a little bit on a comment that Bob had made earlier, is this idea that So we've already heard now from Justin the idea that for an event like this, they would normally have 20 people, and they've decided that maybe they're willing to only have 6. Okay, great. The event starts, and now the people that we've been talking to, who are locally out for patrol, etc., somebody else is like, wait, this is not safe. Why don't we have the 20 people here? Maybe now we've got the 20 people here. We're paying for the 20 people, and that's something that's occurring as a decision on that day. Maybe this another decision that occurs that occurs in the process leading up to there is that they would not be safe if they did not have a particular piece of equipment that they don't have access to normally, and they go and they purchase, for example, stuff that we hate them even having, like some kind of riot gear or something, because they're concerned about the possibility of what might happen in this event. Really bad case scenario is that the sheriff's department decides, potentially on the day of the event, that the number of people who are showing up for our event and then bleeding out of our event and going to Del Playa and going to house parties is actually with the source of an increase in the amount of chaos and the number of complaints and service requests. And so now they start to think, oh, well, the fact that the Isla Vista Community Service District had this event that they weren't able to contain correctly with the plan that they had for it is leading to problems in the community at large. We need to bring in emergency people last minute, possibly not even from our county, in order to come in order to try to solve that issue. Maybe now we're paying for the thing that we absolutely hated, which is the police crackdown issues on Isla Vista. Now we potentially in a situation where somebody gets hurt on Del Playa, and the sheriff insists that the only reason why that happened is because there was this giant event, and one of the people who was actually like instigator of that situation was there as an attendee of that event, and then left that event early, or left the event when the event closed, and then went to DP and instigated some kind of large incident. Now suddenly, potentially, we're on the hook for whatever costs the sheriff's department has related to that entire incident and the incident response. With a contract that is worded in the way that this contract is worded, there's no end to the amount of costs that could attempt to get shifted to us. I mean, best case scenario are insurance, but I mean, at that point, we keep relying upon insurance. You're never going to get insurance ever again. It's just the pit of liability for me here is just a bottomless pit of despair. The clarification, though, that I would like to ask legal counsel is you were saying that just narrowly on the indemnification clause, you're saying that this doesn't apply somehow, like we don't have to hold them. So when I usually think of indemnification clauses, I don't necessarily think that they actually did something wrong. I think of the situation that they didn't do something wrong and someone's decided to sue them over it, and now they have to go into legal defense for it, and we're on the hook to defend them and to pay all the legal costs related to defending them. Are you saying that
covers both situations? You're right, and that's a good.
I'm just verifying. Are you saying that if it's in the line of duty somehow that we're not being forced to do that payment during this case, I wasn't catching the wording there.
No problem. And Section 8. Indemnification insurance. Customers shall agree to defend, indemnify, and save harmless the county to procure and maintain insurance in accordance with provisions of Exhibit C. That's just a pointer to Exhibit C. That's all Section 8 does. So if you turn to Exhibit C, that's where the meat is on the indemnity provisions as well as the insurance provisions. The indemnification language is right there. It's the first paragraph. That the customer agrees to indemnify, defend, with counsel reasonably approved by the county, hold harmless the county, everyone else under the sun, including their dog, volunteers against any and all claims, actions, losses. That's what you're saying that someone accuses them of doing something wrong, right? That covers the claiming part of it. Actions, losses, damages, judgments, that happens after a determination is made that somebody did something wrong. And or liabilities arising out of this agreement, any cause whatsoever, acts, errors, omissions, etc., incurred by county on account of any claim, except where such indemnification is prohibited by law. Customer's indemnification obligation applies to county's active as well as passive negligence, but does not apply to the county's sole negligence or willful misconduct. That last section is a carve-out that covers if they are negligent, the indemnification applies active as well as passive negligence, but does not apply to the county's sole negligence or willful misconduct. So if what the county is doing, if their officers act in a way where they are solely responsible for their own negligence, or if they act in a way that is willful, which is to say intentional, they do something wrong, they committed an assault, not in the course and scope of their duties, they're taking a break, and they decide they've had enough of some punk kid who is razzing them for being a pig, whatever it is, and hauls off and uses a nightstick on it. Willful misconduct, they do so intentionally. Those types of incidences are not covered by this indemnification provision. My long-winded lawyerly explanation was going to the fact that this district does not control officers in the performance of their duties, which is to say the situations that can arise where this indemnification clause would trigger to make this district responsible for the conduct of the law enforcement officers carrying out their duties, it's not, the universe is very, very small because their actions are as peace officers. They just happen to be where we ask them to be. We're not telling them what to do. We're not telling them how to do it. We're not instructing them on force levels. I mean, that's what the payment provision is really for, in a roundabout way. But if they deploy 6 officers to cover a spring festival, they're not reporting to Jonathan on where they go and what they do. They're reporting to their sergeant or their lieutenant who's telling them what to do and where to go. They're acting according to their policies and practices and training, which we don't control, and they're acting in accordance with their authority under the penal code. Because all of that is true, as it is, the types of situations where they're going to do something and it's going to be our fault, or we will have to cover their legal costs if someone sues them, those types of circumstances are going to be extremely rare.
I guess I must be fundamentally misunderstanding something. Because what I was my understanding is that normally that would be the case, except for the fact that we're signing an indemnification clause with them. And now, all of those things terrify me. The fact that we don't control their force levels, we don't control their training, we don't control their operations or deployment or anything that occurs during the course of that day. Mm-hmm. But whatever it is that they do, whoever they manage to piss off, whatever lawsuit they end up bringing on related to that, we're indemnifying them for. No, so that's what I'm misunderstanding here. So we are the customer, and we are
and another
agreeing to defend, indemnify, and hold harmless the county for all claims, actions, losses, damages, judgments, and liabilities arising out of this agreement for any cause whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So I guess I don't understand how that means that we are not.
Because the next sentence says the customer's indemnification obligation applies to county's active as well as past negligence, but does not apply to county's sole negligence or willful misconduct.
But I'm not claiming a scenario where they did willful misconduct.
Not about willful misconduct. The key there is county's sole negligence. What I'm suggesting to you is that they will always be solely responsible for their own conduct. They're not going to be acting pursuant to instructions from anybody at the district. Therefore, they will almost always be in a situation where they are solely responsible for their conduct.
Interesting.
Okay. The other aspect I'll throw out there, and for people really getting into the weeds, and if you're ever interested in going to law school and becoming a public lawyer, public entities are not liable for negligence. We have immunity under the government code under a doctrine called sovereign immunity. It goes all the way back, doing the channel Professor Geis here, it goes all the way back to England under the concept that you couldn't sue the king unless the king allowed you to sue them. Sovereign immunity, it's carried over to the colonies, it's carried out west here to California, starting in section 800 of the government code and going all the way up through section up to 1000. That's called the Government Claims Act, and public entities are not liable for negligence. So they would have to have some statutorily based theory for recovery that goes beyond simple negligence. We would have immunity for that. The Sheriff's Department has immunity for that. So that's not a type of concern.
One more thing. So would you
Sure.
say that
This
not
is
to draw
much
this
more
on,
than I normally
you
talk, so.
you can give a quick yes or no answer, but it's
Okay, if I can, I
my
will.
assumption is that most claims against law enforcement officers boil down to willful misconduct.
No.
Okay,
Most
we don't have
claims
to jump
against-
down the rabbit hole.
Most claims against law enforcement officers arise in the context of a violation of civil rights. So
Oh,
yes,
okay,
there is
okay.
a willful component to it, but it would not be correct to say that it comes down to willful misconduct. Willful misconduct is an officer acting not under color of law, which is to say not cloaked as a law enforcement officer, but acting outside of that. Outside of that sphere.
That makes sense.
Legally, there's a pretty big distinction between the two. So.
Okay, so I think we've had a meaty discussion about this. Thank you for bringing up
Very
these issues. Glad that we were able to get them out of the way. I
Just
think
want to make sure that I've answered Director Freeman's concern. Because he brings up a very good concern.
I actually, I do think I understand what you're saying. I'm not certain I do.
Happy to talk
Thank
with
you.
We'll have to trace the logic.
I'll move that we table this item.
Okay, so I don't think we need a motion, but thank you for that, George. I think we're gonna move along, chat afterwards. Okay, we're gonna go to item 4.3, district employment policies. We should all have a copy of 11.1 district employment status and compensation standards. I was looking at Jonathan Friend to introduce it, but I'm remembering that he is very hoarse today. And so I don't know if our policy committee has any comments to make on these policies. My understanding is that essentially what they do is that they cap the amount of sick days that employees who they cap when sick, or the amount of sick days that an employee can accrue over the course of a year, and base it off of sort of when they start and prorate those number of sick days, and put in a standard that says you have to be an employee of the district for 1 year to cash out your sick days, and set.
Jonathan can't really speak. He's shaking his head no the whole
Okay.
So we did discuss that, but that's going to be coming back to our next policy committee meeting.
I was wondering why this looked like it had changed.
It's just the compensation standards and employment status of the employees.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what we did discuss was approving this policy that would talk about the compensation setting a minimum of $15 an hour, has been discussed at this board. Additionally, what we wanted to do was to make sure that that our part-time employees were given the opportunity to work more than 20 hours. In our first draft of this, part-time employees, it said would not work more than, I believe, 19 hours a week. And just something that our committee had discussed in the past was that there can be times when it's beneficial to have a long-term employee who is part-time to work on specific projects. So that's just something we amended here to provide for a part-time employee to work a minimum of 20-hour weeks and still be a regular employee of the district. Additionally, for temporary employees, we kept that $15 an hour rate and just defined temporary employees as working no more than 1,080 hours during the term of their employment. So that's half the time for a full year of work. One thing that we removed from this policy was the provision on independent contractors, just because at the recommendation of council, they really shouldn't be considered in our employment policy because they're not employees of the district. I'm not sure if you have anything else, Bob.
No, hopefully what we tried to do is just make this a little bit simpler and accommodating for the types of employees that we want, the three categories of what we would normally consider regular employees.
George?
So, I'm just wondering, shouldn't this all come to us as one package? Because if it comes in piecemeal, then we can approve something here that's gonna have an impact on the next piece. And I'm thinking employee benefits, I think, need to be tied into here. I would like to know what the employee benefits are gonna be for categories B and C. And so
I think that's a good point. It's just sometimes it's easier if we bring these three categories and everybody goes, okay, that's the three categories, then the policy committee can work on the benefits for those categories.
Seems like this is laying the groundwork.
Yeah, so this is kind of just laying the groundwork for those three categories, which then help us say, okay, temporary employees are not gonna get any vacation, they're not gonna get any sick, they're gonna get $15 an hour, or maybe we change that, and we do give them a temporary employee some time off, but we didn't have that, we had some of that discussion on temporary employees, but not a full discussion.
So then my only follow-up is, the university has a rule which I think a lot of thought has gone into, which is it only allows you to do the temporary one time, and then you're done. Otherwise, what you end up with is temporary employees that are there for 3 to 5, 6 years, and it kind of defeats the purpose of, I don't know if you want to, I mean, I don't know what your philosophy is on temporaries, but they say once you've done the 1080, you're done. And you can't come back for 6 months.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
The only thought that I have on that is the county has a very similar rule, but it can be overridden by the Civil Service Commission. And they have plenty of department heads going to the Civil Service Commission to overwrite that rule.
Your unions aren't so happy about that, are they?
Right. What we really could say is, we could add to this, unless approved by
The board.
the board.
I'm happy with that, if that's, I mean, it's not a big deal, but.
We should have the expectation temporary employees either go to either
That's
go
right.
to
That's right.
part-time, permanent, and get benefits, or they go to a full-time position, because that's what you're trying to say. If it's more than a temporary employee, they should get benefits. And I agree with that too. So I'd say only if there were special circumstances that the board would approve to have another term. I mean, we could, I don't know what you guys think.
So with that change, I'll move that we approve this with the idea that I'm going to accept the wisdom of the committee that doing this piecemeal is a good way to do it.
I'd agree, but maybe we just want to firm up the language right now, just since we are solidifying the policy. Jay, do you have any thoughts?
The language you want to suggest.
So the language I would suggest is that upon the completion of a temporary employee's 1,080 hours, they may not be rehired for a period of 6 months.
Rehired as temporary employees for a period of 6 months?
Yeah.
So they could be rehired as a part-time employee?
Yes.
Okay.
Does that work?
Spencer, can you read that to us?
I don't have the minutes up.
It's linked. It's on the agenda.
Oh, no, now I'm getting it up.
See, upon the completion of employees' 1080 hours, they may not be rehired. It should be as a temporary employee. Upon the completion of employees' 1080 hours, they may not be rehired as a temporary employee for a period of 6 months.
Should I add the part about
No, I'm good with that.
the board being able to?
I'm good with the philosophy that temporary employee is a temporary employee, we should make it a permanent.
Yeah, if you want to keep it.
I mean,
Agreed.
Yeah, and there's a clear end date, so that's something that we
yeah,
should.
and it's not very fair to hire a temporary employee and not give them insurance benefits and not give them vacation and not give them sick leave. That's not my personal philosophy of how you run a government.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that.
So, did I make a motion?
Yes,
Did
you
I make
did.
a
There's been a
motion?
motion made by Thurlow. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Bertrand. Okay, any public comment about the very engaging world of employment policies?
And this is the motion to approve as amended?
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
All right, back to the board. Any other comments? Okay.
I'll have one long-term comment. I was thinking about this and saying, as we grow as an entity, we may have a classification of employees that this could apply to management employees, and a different set of rules might apply to non-management employees. Because it gets a little bit confusing in talking about hours versus salaried employees, but I think for now we're fine with this. But someday in the future, we may want to make some amendments.
Thank you for the policy committee for your diligence on this policy. I'm going to go ahead and call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes 6-0 with 1 absence. Okay, we're going to move on to item 4.4, district press release procedure, to discuss procedures and protocol for sending press releases and statements to the public and give direction to staff. So I'll just say for starter, this is something that I've spoken with Jonathan and Deborah about a little bit in terms of trying to increase our statements to the public and get those more broadly known, just because I know that one of the things we identified during sort of the pre-hiring process for the assistant general manager was a desire to have better communications with the public. I know that this item was specifically put on the agenda by Director Thurlow, so I just wanted to throw it over to you, begin the discussion if you'd like.
I want to keep this really short and sweet, because I know that now that we've been here for a while, our students are all ready to go. So I'm a little bit concerned about the process of putting out the press release regarding the fraternity and public safety in Isla Vista. And it's not the content of it, it's more the process of it. And just a reminder that when the district sends out a press release, it's over all of our names. So my name was on that, but I never saw it. And then it went out, and then it's out there. And I understand that we have Brown Act, which means that you can't distribute it, and then, but in a release like that, it seemed to me that it could have waited until the full board met and the full board approved it. My concern, although now that I know more about admiralty law,
Admiralty law?
or you know,
Sovereign.
the king.
Sovereign immunity. Admiralty law has to do with the high seas and shipping. Just in case you're wondering.
You've been reading the paper too much about
Yeah,
that.
Sounds like an
boat accident. I guess I had one question, which was, did you review this press release before it went out?
No.
Is that something you should do?
Typically, I am not asked to review press releases unless they have to do with a specific legal issue or pending litigation, where I'm commenting on the litigation itself.
Okay, so my concern was that this press release went out early in what was a criminal investigation, in which we named the parties that were being investigated before I think it was really clear that there was culpability there. So that was my first thing, which is I think it could have easily gone out without the name of the parties in it, and it would have, and I don't know what our liability would be, is if we put out a press release that accuses somebody of a felony and it turns out they're not guilty of that felony.
That's typically why you have qualifying language such as allegedly, reportedly, supposedly, purportedly.
Yeah.
That way there's no ascribing any of guilt or taking a position in terms of that aspect.
So
I will
again,
just
I'm
go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have, there's no issue with the content. I support the content. I think it could have waited. It didn't change anything in terms of public safety in Isla Vista if it came out on a Monday or if it came out on a Friday. And it was a somewhat controversial in terms of the naming of this specific institution. And it could have gone out without the name if you just said a fraternity. So I only bring it up because I think anything like that, I mean, I understand the idea of us touting all the good works we're doing, but when we make a very strong political comment in a press release and we put everybody's name on it, I think in fairness, it should at least be run by individual board members. So that's all.
Okay, I'm going to go over to Christy and then Ethan.
I think it was a transparency thing, though. I feel like the community wanted the name of the institution. It was more of a, how are we going to keep this community safe if we don't know who's doing what? It's more, I think it was a transparency. And I think what you were saying was we should be meeting before we release things, and I agree with that. Like for flyers and stuff, before we put like push flyers, we should talk to each other to see what we should be sending out instead of, I guess, making it easy through like texting or something. But we should all meet before we send things out.
If I can just jump in before I go to Ethan, I want to clarify that looking at the press release and the language that we use to refer to the institution in question is that there were incidents reported, which to my understanding was public knowledge at the time and was widely reported in a number of press outlets. And I just want to agree with Christy that I think it was exceedingly frustrating for many people in the student community that there was hesitancy to name the group because of the fact that this is a repeat offense, allegedly, repeatedly happened, and people in our community, especially women in our community, need to be aware if this is happening. Go over to Ethan.
Yeah, and I agree with the comments so far. And I do think that there are times when urgent communication is needed. Maybe in the future when because I think we should bring this item back in full to talk about our broad public relations strategy, but perhaps in the future when there are these urgent communications, it's sent on behalf of the directors who are signing the message and not on behalf of the district. We can look into that. And of course, when there is the time, bringing it before the board to consider. So that's just one thought I have, but I do think that there was value in being transparent and being honest and showing survivors in the community that we stand with them.
Jake?
So one thing I've been actually sitting here trying, where was this press release? I found reports of it, and actually I had seen when it had happened, because I follow, for example, Daily Nexus on Facebook. I had seen the IVCSD release statements on solidarity, etc. But I've actually not managed to find a copy of the actual.
It's been emailed to us.
It's in our email.
No, but where was it?
Check news.
Where was it publicly? Like, how did other people get it?
Sent to the press outlets, and they did what they want with it.
Okay, so there isn't a public copy of it other than the emails that everyone received.
Spencer and I talked about having a press release section on the website now.
I was curious what the.
I felt the same way where I was confused when I couldn't find any of our press releases on our website, because at one time when there was the old iteration of the website, we had a couple on there.
Okay.
But I'm gonna work with Jonathan and get that.
So I first of all I want to say that I agree with George's comments about the having something go out and then have everyone's name on it. In this case, I mean the content of what we're talking about here, I understand and I agree with. The I guess maybe the fear that I have is that the precedent kind of gets set that, okay, well, something happens, the district can make a quick comment about it, and then you start commenting on more and more things. It becomes more and more difficult to have any essential control over it, because it isn't even it's not that the people who wrote the words are doing it. It is that our district said it, and if we don't have some kind of process by which we are able to essentially as a body control what ends up going out, I'm concerned then where the statements end up coming from in the future. And it might not even be right now, but it might be, as I said, like in the future where board changes, not even necessarily just people that we have right now. I think it's important to have some kind of policy and procedure for it. So I like the fact that this got put down. One thing, just to bring up some ideas here, is you can imagine, for example, the difference between a factual recounting of information that has been received by the district versus statements that are made about those the factual statements. And so, for example, there might be a difference between the IVCSD received a statement from the sheriff's department with the following information in it, and it's pretty much what the sheriff's department, for example, told us. Or if there's a report of something that comes from, for example, the park district, about something that occurs in a park that we think that people need to know because of it is separating that from the more like essentially flavor text that can go in that directs the thought process that somebody has with relation to information. Maybe that's something that would require some kind of board process. Maybe another thing that we could look at is the idea that there's if the names of all the directors, for example, are on it, as Edison was saying, putting the names of directors that sign off on it, or separately having something that makes it clear that this is a preliminary statement made by staff. as opposed to a statement made by board members. I could also see an argument that maybe such press releases should be made entirely by staff. I don't know in this case exactly who was involved in constructing it, but something where board, if there's statements that need to be made out quickly that are maybe, for example, under some kind of factual basis, that it is something that is entirely in the purview of, for example, Jonathan doing that, and if board members want to weigh in on that, then it would have to come to a public board meeting. Another comment on there is, if nothing else, it relates to fairness. There's this aspect of text that ends up occurring inside of the press releases being able to be directly influenced by some subset of the board as opposed to by the whole board. It might be better if it's just not influenced by any of the board. But I think there are a lot of interesting things that could be done here. I'm not certain if maybe the next thought process here is procedures and protocols, two P words that are also related to policy. Maybe this is something that gets kicked to the policy committee.
I think this is probably worth some ruminating on by a committee such as the policy committee. It seems like you have some good ideas so far, and I like them. Yeah, so I think we will recommend that this go to the policy committee. I know you guys have a docket that you're sort of, I think, coming to the end of, at least when it comes to employment-related policies. So we'd love to have you guys do some discussion about that as well.
Yeah, maybe we can look around and see if other entities have policies on press releases. The one thing is we're kind of unique in that I think the 5 elected officials, you can do a press release anytime you want about anything you want, being an elected official or representative of the district. George and I have to think twice about that. George maybe more than me in terms of saying, you know, we're kind of a liaison a little bit with the county and UCSB, so you know, we'd probably be more reluctant. But when I was the auditor controller, I didn't go to council to do my press releases. I didn't go to the board. I did the press release from the auditor controller. And it usually was about something that was financially related that was appropriate for my jurisdiction. And maybe I did about 2 in my life. And so, you know, I think it's kind of, we don't want to, we do want that transparency that, you know, and jump on issues and be part of that. Because my question is, when we did that press release, was there a consequence for that fraternity? I mean, you go down to San Diego and you watch UC San Diego, they just shut down about 5 fraternities, and it's you know, excess partying, somebody, you know, dies, and you go, you know, I'm not so sure sexual assault's not just as bad, you know, and so what's the consequences of, you know, that's what we want to see in our sexual assault investigation. You know, it's after the fact. So what are the consequences to the perpetrators, and what are the consequences to the entities that are, you know, maybe letting that stuff happen or have a culture that lets it happen? We have to change that. So
I also just want to mention that I think the press release also served the dual purpose of it was to raise awareness for the issue, but it also served as a great moment and opportunity for us to re-publicize the services that we provide to survivors of sexual violence, including the Survivor Resource Center and the interpersonal violence investigator, and I think that it served its purpose as far as that goes. And so I want to go to Ethan and then open up public comment because I saw a hand.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said as far as raising awareness about the services that are available. But I also want to thank Director Nguyen for your leadership on this. Really appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I saw a hand in the back. I'll open up public comment.
Hi, I'm not familiar with this press release, but I just wanted to make a point of clarification. It was actually SDSU, and they suspended 14 fraternities. And I think that as a woman in this community, I would like to see this press release being circulated more widely, because I think that if the community service district has these resources, maybe putting out mailers would be a little bit better. So that way it's actually directly infiltrated, I hate that word, but into the community and more widely dispersed, because I think that would be a little bit of a beacon of light right now because especially the fact that multiple sexual assaults occurred in this past month, and there was a hate crime against someone who's actually very near to my heart. It is not okay that we don't have people standing up for us. I can't believe, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. I didn't think that that was going to make me emotional. But it makes me very angry to not see elected officials at the institution where I go to school or in the community really like showing comprehensive action. So I'm actually involved in Associated Students, and it's been very frustrating for me as well to try to like incite that kind of motivation. But I think seeing a press release like you said with transparency would be really helpful to the community to help us heal, because I know like having all these incidents back to back to back has been a lot for a lot of different students, and showing survivors that there are these resources that you provide as our government on a local level would be very beneficial.
Thank you so much for your comment, and most of all, thank you for your advocacy on this issue and continuing to push to make these issues well known. We appreciate it. Okay, are there any other public comments on this item? Okay, I appreciate this coming before the board. We are going to move to item 5, reports. I want to start with reports from members of the board. Jay.
I attended a Board of Supervisors meeting, which was, I guess, a week ago, where they talked about the retail cannabis dispensary permit process for your Nella Vista. It was actually, in some sense, in my mind, it felt like, although of course it is not, in my mind, it felt like a follow-on to a discussion we were having with the Isla Vista Community Network last month. One of the discussion at the Isla Vista Community Network was looking at, well, I won't read because of context here. So the retail cannabis dispensary permit process has been moved from a random selection, which is per person per property, to a random selection that is per property, and is now being moved to a merit-based program. And the county staff was directed to come back with preliminary concept for how the merit-based scoring program could work. And at the Isla Vista Community Network meeting, we were discussing things that we would want to see from such a merit-based program, and there was this idea that we would form some kind of maybe subcommittee or some kind of group that would end up talking about those issues locally. We were encouraged to wait to do that until after the Board of Supervisors meeting had an opportunity to hear from staff on that matter. That said, the staff, when I talked to Dennis right before the meeting, it was that he was intending the board to make final decision on what kinds of criteria would be looked at during that meeting. And so there was actually almost no one there, to the surprise of the people who were there to talk about that item and comment on it, particularly given the amount of attention that had been put on both previous meetings for retail cannabis dispensary, but particularly previous meetings on cultivation. And the result was, I'm rather happy with the results in some sense, actually. And the conversations between Joan Hardman and Steve Lavigino on the board in order to push for having a strong component of local neighborhood issues and potentially even having input from the community on what that will be, what the criteria will be. This is something then, the timeline for this is that it won't come back to the board until, I think it's late December, which doesn't even make any sense, so I guess it would have to be initially January. But that this then it's unlikely to actually get finalized until February. So there's now more time again in order to discuss, argue, and maybe throw yet another wrench into it and start the whole process over again, because that's what we do every few months with this particular issue. So.
Well, thank you for that, Jay. I know that she's not here, but I want to thank Supervisor Hartman for her leadership on that issue. It's something that we discussed when we had county staff here to present about the cannabis ordinance. And one thing I'll point out is that I think that what you're getting at, Jay, is that the timeline that we heard about for approval of the criteria process and then the selection and then the permitting is probably moved back a little bit from what we heard. Okay, any other reports from members of the board? Ethan?
Thank you. So as I briefly mentioned earlier, I spoke earlier today at the Intergovernmental Relations class, which I know George is speaking at. in the near future, and Supervisor Hartman is speaking at soon as well. And I think it's a really great program that UCSB has right now, letting students know about what's going on in their community and how they can get involved. So I definitely appreciated the opportunity to present there. Also, earlier today, I took a tour of Pescadero Lofts with Father John, and for anyone who hasn't been, I would highly recommend it. It's really an amazing program there. It's made a big difference in homelessness in Isla Vista. So highly recommend it.
Thank you for that, Ethan. Any other reports from members of the board?
I just have a question, Jonathan. When are we gonna get our room back?
I think
I was told Friday of this week, but I went in there today and it does not seem ready to be Friday of this week.
It's not agendized, so I won't go in.
But yeah, that we can talk after more.
Offline conversation.
All right.
End of November is what they told us.
We get a Christmas present, George.
Christmas.
Please go there next year.
Okay.
And speaking of presents, I'd also like to wish George a very happy birthday.
Whoa!
No way. Happy birthday, George.
Oh, don't rub it in.
Should we sing?
Sorry, singing's not on the agenda.
All right. Well, Ross told us no. Okay, great. Happy birthday, George. Let's go to reports from committees. Any committee reports? I think we already got everything from
We
policy.
met at policy, so that was good. We were able to get again and get a little action, so.
Excellent.
Deborah
Okay.
did a good job of putting stuff together.
Excellent. And we wish her to get well soon. Okay. Report from District Council.
3 quick points. Thank you, Mr. President. First is you contract with my firm. I'm, not literally your lawyer. My firm is your lawyer, and I am simply the representative picked by you and my firm to be your lawyer as present here today. So one of the things that my firm does on occasion is we track issues that are relevant to our clients, and we put together a memorandum on those issues, and we disperse those out. What that does is it allows us to get information out to our clients quickly, and we do it on a prorated cost-sharing basis. So a project that might cost $2,000 to one client ends up costing like $200 or $300 when we disperse out to all of our clients who are on these lists. We recently did that for IVCSD on AB 5, which is the law that was passed categorizing or making standards for how to categorize an employee versus an independent contractor. You may have been hearing about that in the news. We have dealt with that. This district has dealt with that in the past. So IVCSD was included in the distribution for AB 5. That was sent to Jonathan. So if you want a copy of that, Jonathan has it. And if you don't have, Jonathan doesn't have it available, contact me and I can provide that to you. That's your work product. It's there for your consumption, and you're free to share it with any constituents who have any questions on how the law works. Second is a financial aspect. The way my firm does its billing, we stop billing on the 15th of November, and so all of the billing that is done for all of our clients through the end of November and the end of December, you don't get billed for in this year. You get billed for it coming up in January. So there will be a 6-week period where there will be no billing from us on that, and that shows up again in January. There's no extra cost for you for that. It's just how we ended up closing out our business.
Why do you have to pay out everything we owe you before the end?
And that's for a budgeting standpoint. You know that those bills for those 6 weeks end up coming up in January. So if the bill looks a little bit bigger in January, it's because it includes the 6 weeks period for the end of November and through December. And the last item, to go back very quickly on the policy issue on the press releases, I think it's just a good opportunity for me to remind the board, as well as members of the public who are here, that this board, you represent an entity, you represent a governmental agency, and that agency can only act as you dictate, since you are the elected, in this case appointed officials. When you vote to do something, that's the entity doing something. Or when you delegate your authority as elected and appointed officials to staff to do something on your behalf, you have the authority under the laws of the state of California to do that. So it's important that as we go to policy committee, I will be interfacing with policy committee on how to balance when this entity speaks because in order for it to speak as a government agency, that should come via the decision-making process of the members of this board. I think I would like to elevate the comment that Director Freeman made about a subset of directors speaking on behalf of the district. That can't happen. It is not appropriate for a subset of directors to speak on behalf of the district because it's not a vote of the board in an open meeting. The laws are designed the way that they are to not have that be the case, so that the members of the public can come to a publicized meeting based on notice and engage with their elected officials and have the board act in accordance with them, not to have subsets of the board to act maybe under the cloak of that authority. That being said, I'd also like to elevate the comment of Director Geis that as individual members elected, you can make whatever comments that you feel are appropriate in your capacity as an elected official or an appointed official, depending upon the dictates of your position. That is well within your right to do, and of course, you do that according to the dictates of your own conscience. So my advice to the policy committee will be to balance those interests, but I did feel it was an important reminder about how this board acts, that it can't act without a vote of the board in a public meeting, both for the board members and for members of the public.
But on policy committee, we could simply come up with a policy that says press releases can be issued by the general manager.
That's correct.
Or we could say press releases can be issued by the general manager with the approval of the president.
That's correct.
And so, I think about press releases, they're mostly political statements, or they're mostly saying, hey, we accomplished this, or hey, we hired somebody new. It seems like, maybe there's two levels of that, but as policy committee, I would like to see that remain streamlined. I look back at the county and the CEO does all the press releases. They may get directed by the board of saying, hey, there's an emergency, we need a press release, or OES or whatever. So I think we should make it so that our press releases are not, don't get in our way, that we stay pretty fluid on those.
And whatever the policy committee ends up coming up with as their recommendation for the board to consider, that's the process that needs to happen, because that's the level of transparency that's required for the public to engage, to be able to give their input, and then ultimately this board acts as a board on behalf of the entity to give direction on how those statements are made on its behalf. That's my
Thank you for that,
report.
Ross. Quick comments?
Yeah, can I just say, I think that's a very, very good point, which it reminds us that the public has as much right to be involved when we issue a press release as we do. And that when we issue a press release, in essence, it's not just we're issuing it on behalf of this board, the members, but we're issuing it on behalf of the community. I mean, we represent the community, and so when we issue a press release, so it seems to me, and again, the content of this is really, really important. My real concern is we're going to go down. Bad things happen in this community, just like in every community. Where do we draw the line?
Thank you for that, George.
But thank you for that education, and I really will brush up on my admiral law.
Only if you're going to be out of carriage at sea on a cruise ship, otherwise, or cargo containers. Otherwise, I don't know how it would be relevant.
Admiralty law is going to be my pseudonym for when I write a mystery novel. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move to item 5.4, report from general manager.
I'll give you a report in writing, but basically the interns did a great job of making sure we can get in touch with businesses about the festival, and so that a lot of time last week went towards meeting with them. So we had the town hall. That also went well. The interns are working on summarizing the results of the survey into a report that we can share with you, so that we can just have more information as we make the decision. And the community center is another something we're trying to keep chugging along, but is not on the timeline we'd like to be on. I think we made some progress meeting with Supervisor Hartman this weekend, and so it looks like what the county wants to do is combine the discussions of ownership and the agreement into one. And so we're waiting for them to be prepared to discuss ownership with us before they're gonna discuss the agreement with us. If that makes sense, I know it doesn't make a lot, but
And
it's how they would like to go about it.
and if I can just mention it as much as I can, because the board has talked about these two buildings before, that if members of the board are frustrated with the pace at which this is moving along, I share your frustration, and please voice it to appropriate entities in county government.
Can we agendize that discussion for the next meeting?
Just about the agreement in general? or
Yeah,
the community center?
just a general, I mean, not too long, but
Under
But get a
real
report.
property negotiations?
well, I don't know, are we talking about going into closed session? I don't.
Well, that's what we did for the last time that we talked about our strategy. So, just throwing it out there.
Well, I'll leave it up to the general manager and our council, but it just seems like the timing is good right now to sort of, for you to catch us up about what's going on and what are the discussions and what's the ramifications and how much money are we paying right now to run that building that's closed?
Not being run. Yeah, we would have had it as an agenda item today, but we anticipated a much longer agenda with the contract.
Thank you,
But,
thank you.
you know, we were trying to balance, we weren't trying to have like a 5-hour meeting today, but it ended up being only 2.
All right.
As much as we love meeting with you all. Okay, thank you for that report, Jonathan. I hope you get well soon.
Thank you.
It's been trouble. I've had to speak for him all day. No, just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Damn it, Jonathan.
Okay, any other comments from members of the board? Any other public comment? Okay, anyone have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to, you go.
Move to adjourn.
I'll second.
Okay, made by Freeman, seconded by Bertrand. Any board discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 6-0 with 1 absence. Thanks, everyone.
One thing I haven't yet figured out is whether it ends based upon what's currently streaming or whether it ends based upon what the preview is showing me that it's what's streaming.
It should end as soon as you